Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a really fascinating idea through the work of the incredible poet and scholar A.K. Ramanujan. The premise? That a poem isn't just a container for an idea, it's a way of thinking in and of itself. You know, it's a classic question in literary studies, right? Where does the meaning of a poem actually live? Is it what the author intended? Is it baked into the words and structure? Or is it all about what we, the readers, bring to it? Well, A.K. Ramanujan offers a really compelling answer to that. And what's so cool is that he didn't just write a bunch of dense theoretical essays to make his point. No, we're going to see how he actually built his argument inside his poems, using their very structure and language. Okay, so before we can really get into the poems, we have to understand the lens he was using. It's a way of reading that completely rejects looking at a poem in a vacuum. For Ramanujan, everything, and I mean everything, comes down to context. These source notes here really lay it all out. They make a powerful case that his entire approach to poetry was rooted in the specific, the particular. He was arguing against this idea that there's some kind of one-size-fits-all way to find meaning in a text. This quote really is the key. At the heart of his framework is this total rejection of easy, universal truths. For him, a poem wasn't some vessel for a timeless, placeless message. Instead, meaning is something that's actively created, right there on the page. By the way, all these specific little details, linguistic, cultural, historical, all play off each other. And when Ramanujan says context, he means it in the most granular way possible. We're not just talking about the historical moment it was written in, we're talking about the choice of a single word, a local reference nobody outside of a particular town would get, even a comma or a capital letter. Every single element is part of this unique web of meaning. All right, theory is great, but let's see how this actually works. We're going to start by diving into his 1966 poem, The Striders. So he doesn't kick things off with some grand statement about life or the universe. Nope. He starts by forcing us to look, really look, at this tiny, almost insignificant water bug. It's a deliberate move. He's grounding us in this super specific, microscopic world before he does anything else. And this is where the engine of the poem really starts to hum. Look at this incredible contrast. He builds meaning by first locking our focus onto the hyper-specific, almost scientific image of the bug, and then he just completely collapses the distance between that tiny insect and the vastness of the entire cosmos. See, this is that framework in action. The poem's meaning isn't just about the bug, and it's not just about the universe. It emerges in that tense electric space between the two. And because of that, the meaning he creates is intensely local and at the same time cosmically huge. It's a perfect demonstration of how the physical and the metaphysical can't be pulled apart. Okay, so let's switch gears and see how this same contextual approach works in a totally different way. In his poem A River, Ramanujan stops looking at the natural world and turns that same sharp, analytical eye onto poetry itself. As the analysis here points out, this poem is incredibly self-reflexive. It's not really a poem about a river at all. It's a poem about all the other poems about the river, and it's a pretty sharp critique of how they've romanticized it and, in his view, failed to tell the truth. This quote, which the source notes link to modernist ideas, absolutely nails the pivot the poem makes. It starts with this external, objective thing, a flood, and then it turns inward, becoming this deep, subjective meditation on the failures of art and the responsibilities of the artist. And you can literally watch him build his argument step by step. First, the title, A River. That little word A is doing so much work, criticizing how poets generalize. Then, he fills the poem with all the ugly, tragic details the romantic poems always leave out, so the poem's real meaning becomes this meta-argument for what poetry should do. It should bear witness to everything, not just the pretty parts. So what happens when we put these two very different poems next to each other? What we start to see is a really consistent critical method. We see a unified theory of what a poem is and what it does. And this is the big takeaway. His poems aren't just passive things waiting for us to come along and dissect them. They are active, sharp, intellectual investigations. Whether he's looking at an insect or the history of poetry, the poem itself is where the thinking happens. So in the end, for Ramanujan, poetry is a unique form of epistemology, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a way of knowing things. By always insisting on the importance of specific context, he shows how poetic language can create connections and uncover truths that other kinds of writing just can't get to. Which leaves us with a final and pretty big question to think about. What happens to how we understand literature? And maybe even how we understand truth itself, if we start reading poems not just as beautiful objects, but as powerful and unique ways of thinking?